The slot machines blur into streaks of colored light, and my vision tunnels at the edges like someone is closing curtains on the world. I know what is coming. I have felt this creeping darkness before, twice this week already. But this time, I cannot stop it, and my tray of cocktails tilts in my grip as my knees dissolve beneath me. The casino floor rushes up, and then there is nothing but black silence until sound filters back in fragments, voices above me, the distant chime of slot machines, and something else, a low, commanding voice cutting through everything like a blade. My eyes flutter open to find myself cradled against a chest in a suit that probably costs more than 3 months of my rent, strong arms beneath my shoulders and knees, and when I tilt my head back I see him. Alexander Tremaine. I have never been this close to the owner before, have only glimpsed him from across the casino floor, surrounded by men in dark suits. But everyone knows who he is, and what he is. His face is all sharp, elegant lines, dark eyes that miss nothing. Black hair swept back from a face too severe to be traditionally handsome, but compelling in a way that makes my breath catch even through my disorientation. He is looking down at me with an expression I cannot read, something between fury and concern. And when one of his men steps forward offering to take me, he says only, "She is mine now," and continues walking. I should protest, should insist I can walk, but my body feels like wet paper, and my head spins when I try to lift it, so I stay silent and mortifyingly helpless as he carries me through the casino. Faces turn to watch us pass. Employees and patrons alike staring at the spectacle, and humiliation burns through me hotter than the weakness. He takes me through a door marked private, down a hallway paneled in dark wood, and into an office that screams power and wealth, all leather and mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city. He lowers me onto a sofa with unexpected gentleness and steps back, his eyes traveling over me with an intensity that makes my skin prickle. When his gaze stops at my stomach, at the small curve I have been trying to hide beneath my uniform, his expression hardens into something dangerous. "Who did this to you?" he asks, and his voice is quiet in a way that feels more threatening than shouting. I struggle to sit up, my head still swimming, confusion and fear warring in my chest. "I need to get back to work," I manage, my voice embarrassingly weak. He moves to block the door before I can even attempt to stand. "You are not going anywhere until you tell me who is responsible for putting you in this condition." "Responsible for my condition," I repeat, anger cutting through the fog of weakness and fear, and I push myself upright despite the way the room tilts. "No one is responsible. I am pregnant, and I am working to support myself, and I need this job, so if you will excuse me." I stand and my legs tremble but hold, and I take one step toward the door before his hand closes around my wrist, not painfully but immovably, a band of iron disguised as flesh. "You are Eleanor Whitmore," he says, "and it is not a question. You have been working here for 6 weeks, double shifts most days, and you are 4 months pregnant. You live alone in a studio apartment in the East Side, and before you came here, you worked at a diner until it closed. You collapsed twice last week in the break room but told no one." The recitation of my life from his lips freezes something in my chest, equal parts violation and terror, because why does he know these things? Why has he been paying attention? And when I try to pull my wrist free, his grip only tightens fractionally. "Your ex-boyfriend is James Colborne," he continues, his dark eyes boring into mine with an intensity that makes me want to look away, but I cannot. "James owes me $80,000 and has for 3 months. He has been making excuses, promising payment, and then 6 weeks ago you appeared on my casino floor applying for work." The implication hits me like cold water, and I stop struggling. My mind racing backward through the last weeks, how James insisted he knew about a job opening, how he filled out half the application himself, how he promised it would solve everything. "You think he sent me here?" I whisper, and the betrayal tastes like metal on my tongue, even though James already abandoned me when I told him about the baby. already proved what kind of man he is. Alexander releases my wrist, but does not step back, his presence filling the space between us like smoke. I know he did. The question is, whether you knew. I shake my head, words tangling in my throat, humiliation burning hotter than my anger, because of course James would do this, would try to use me one more time, would gamble that his pregnant ex-girlfriend might be worth something to someone. I did not know, I manage. I needed work and he said he heard you were hiring and I never questioned it because I was desperate. Something in Alexander's expression shifts, the hardness easing by fractions. You will not return to the floor, he says, and it is a decree, not a suggestion. You will stay here where I can ensure you are fed and rested and cared for properly. Panic flares bright and sharp because I cannot accept this, cannot become some kept thing dependent on a man whose reputation whispers of violence and control. I need my job, I say, hating how my voice shakes. I cannot accept charity, and I will not be bought or kept or whatever you think this is. He studies me for a long moment, and I see something almost like approval flicker across his features. This is not charity, Eleanor. This is me ensuring that no one in my employ collapses from malnutrition and exhaustion, and that the games your ex-boyfriend is playing do not put you or your child at further risk. You will stay under my protection and you will be provided for. That is not negotiable. I want to argue, want to fight, but exhaustion crashes over me again and I sway on my feet. He catches my elbow, steadying me, and the gentleness of the touch contradicts everything I know about him. I cannot, I whisper, but even I hear how weak the protest sounds. You can, he says, and you will. I let him put his driver take me home because my legs still feel unsteady, and the thought of the bus makes exhaustion pull at me like an undertow, but I refuse Thomas when he tries to follow me up the stairs to my apartment, insisting I need space and time to think about everything Alexander said. Thomas watches me with the flat professional gaze of someone who has seen too much and judges too little, and he hands me a card with a single phone number printed on it before he returns to the black car idling at the curb. Call if you need anything, he says, and the inflection suggests this is an order from Alexander rather than a courtesy. My apartment building smells like old cooking oil and mildew, 4 floors of peeling paint and worn carpet, and I have never felt the shabbiness more acutely than I do now, after sitting in Alexander's office with its leather and mahogany and view of the city spread out like a kingdom. I unlock my door and know immediately that something is wrong. The air feels disturbed, violated, and when I push the door fully open, my stomach drops like a stone into dark water. Everything has been destroyed. My second-hand furniture is overturned and slashed, stuffing spilling from the sofa cushions like entrails, dishes smashed across the kitchen floor, clothes torn from the tiny closet and scattered like debris after a storm. I stand frozen in the doorway, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps, and then I see the note taped to the bathroom mirror, black marker on white paper in letters that look angry and jagged. Your boyfriend's debts are your problem now. Pay up or pay different. The words blur as tears fill my eyes, fear and fury and helplessness all tangling together until I cannot separate one from the other. I have nothing, no money hidden away, no family to call, no resources beyond the tips I have been hoarding in a jar that now lies shattered on the floor with bills scattered among the glass. I sink onto the edge of my ruined bed, and my hands shake as I pull out my phone, finding the number Alexander programmed into it before he let me leave his office, and I stare at it for a long moment while pride and terror wage war in my chest. I have no choice, nowhere else to go, no one else who can help. I press call, and he answers on the first ring, as though he has been waiting, and when I try to speak, my voice cracks and breaks. My apartment, I manage. Someone came. I cannot stay here. I will be there in 10 minutes, he says, and the cold fury in his voice should frighten me, but instead I feel something loosen in my chest because someone is coming, someone who can do something about this, someone who will not let me face this alone. Do not touch anything, he continues. And Eleanor, if anyone comes to that door before I arrive, you do not open it. Do you understand? I understand, I whisper, and I sit among the ruins of my small, sad life and wait for Alexander Tremaine to arrive like a storm made flesh. And when I hear footsteps in the hallway, 8 minutes later, my heart hammers against my ribs until I hear his voice low and commanding, telling Thomas to secure the building. The door opens and Alexander fills the frame, dark suit and darker eyes sweeping over the destruction with an expression that makes my blood run cold. And then his gaze finds me, and something shifts, the rage banking into something more controlled but no less dangerous. He crosses to me in 3 strides and crouches in front of me, his hands framing my face with unexpected gentleness. Are you hurt? He asks, and I shake my head because physically I am fine, but inside I am breaking apart. He helps me stand, and I sway into him without meaning to, and his arm comes around me solid and steady. You cannot stay here, he says, and this time I do not argue because he is right, and I am too tired and too frightened to keep pretending I can handle this alone. I know, I whisper against his shoulder. Thomas appears in the doorway, and Alexander gives him instructions I only half hear, something about surveillance and finding who did this, and making sure they understand what happens when they touch what belongs to him, and I should object to being classified as his, but the words will not come. Alexander guides me out of the apartment and down to the car, and I leave behind everything I own without looking back because none of it matters anymore. Not the destroyed furniture or scattered clothes or the illusion of independence I have been clinging to like a lifeline. He takes me to a building in the part of the city where doormen wear uniforms and lobby floors gleam like mirrors, and the elevator requires a key card to access the top floor. The penthouse spreads before us when the doors open, all glass and space and luxury so far removed from my reality that I feel like I have stepped into someone else's life, and the absurdity of it breaks something loose, and I laugh, a jagged, hysterical sound that turns into a sob before I can stop it. Alexander settles me onto the sofa with a gentleness that contrasts so sharply with the barely leashed violence I saw in him when he surveyed my destroyed apartment that I cannot reconcile the two versions of the same man, and then he disappears into what I assume is the kitchen, leaving me alone in this cavernous space of glass and steel and luxury that feels like a museum where I do not belong. I am too wired to sit still despite the exhaustion dragging at my limbs, so I stand and explore, my footsteps silent on floors that gleam like still water, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcase the city spread out below like scattered diamonds, the furniture that looks expensive enough to cost more than a year of my rent, the art on the walls that might be original, though I have no way of knowing. I find the bedroom and stop in the doorway, my breath catching because this is not a guest room hastily prepared. This is a space that has been waiting. The closet stocked with clothes in my exact size, tags still attached, maternity wear and soft fabrics and muted colors. And on the dresser a bottle of prenatal vitamins, beside a folder with my name printed on the tab. I open the folder with shaking hands and find medical information, insurance cards, appointment schedules, everything organized and prepared as though he knew I would end up here, as though he has been planning for this, and the realization sends ice down my spine, because how long has he been watching me? What exactly does he want? And why does the preparation feel more like a trap than a rescue? I return to the main room and find Alexander setting food on the dining table. Simple things like bread and soup and fruit, and he gestures for me to sit, but I remain standing, my arms crossed over my chest in a posture I know is defensive, but cannot seem to soften. You knew I would come here, I say, and it is not a question. The clothes in the closet are my size, and the vitamins are the brand my doctor recommended, and you have a folder with my information as though you have been preparing for this. He does not look surprised by the accusation, only meets my gaze with that unreadable dark intensity that makes my pulse jump. I prepared for the possibility, he says. After I learned about your situation and your connection to James, I considered that you might need help, and I wanted to be ready if that moment came. It sounds reasonable when he says it like that, but reasonable does not account for the thoroughness of the preparation or the way he seems to know details about my life that I never shared. You have been watching me, I say, and anger sparks hot and bright beneath the fear, because I have so little privacy and autonomy left, and the idea that even before tonight I was being observed and catalogued makes me feel violated in a new way. He inclines his head slightly, not quite acknowledgement, but not denial either. I have been aware of you, he corrects. There is a difference. You work in my establishment, and you are connected to someone who owes me a significant debt. It would be negligent not to pay attention. The justification is logical, but it does not ease the crawling sensation along my skin. The awareness that I have been visible to him while he remained hidden from me, the power imbalance so vast I cannot see a way to level it. I cannot stay here, I say. But even as the words leave my mouth, I know they are empty, because where else can I go? My apartment is destroyed, and I have no money for a hotel and no friends close enough to impose on for more than a night. You can, and you will, Alexander says, and he pulls out a chair in silent command. Eat, Eleanor. You have not had a proper meal in days, and you need your strength. Everything in me wants to refuse, to cling to the last shreds of defiance and independence, but my stomach cramps with hunger, and the baby needs food even if my pride does not, so I sit and I eat while he watches with focus that makes me hyper-aware of every movement, every bite, every breath. Alexander arrives the next morning with coffee and pastries in white boxes tied with string, and the domesticity of the gesture feels surreal against the backdrop of everything else. But I accept the offering because the alternative is another argument I do not have the energy for, and because the smell of fresh bread makes my stomach clench with want. He does not stay long that first day, just ensures I eat, and asks if I need anything, before disappearing back into whatever world of violence and power he inhabits when he is not here playing caretaker. And I tell myself I am relieved by his absence, even as the penthouse feels emptier the moment the elevator doors close behind him. The pattern establishes itself over the following days without discussion or negotiation. Alexander appearing in the mornings with food, sometimes staying for an hour, and sometimes longer, his presence filling the space in ways that have nothing to do with his physical size and everything to do with the intensity he carries like a second skin. I watch him when he does not realize I am looking, noting the way he moves through the world with absolute certainty. The way his phone buzzes constantly with messages he reads with brief frowns before responding in terse, efficient sentences. The way his voice changes when he takes calls that are clearly business, dropping into something cold and final that makes me remember exactly what he is. He never tries to hide that part of himself, but he also never brings it fully into this space, as though the penthouse exists in some separate reality where the rules are different and violence stays outside the walls. I catch fragments of his world through careful observation, the scar along his left forearm that he notices me noticing but does not explain, the way Thomas defers to him with a respect that borders on fear, the occasional comment about territories and shipments and associates that paint a picture I am not sure I want to see clearly. He asks about the baby constantly, monitoring what I eat and whether I am sleeping, and if I have any pain or discomfort, with a focus that should feel intrusive, but instead makes me feel seen in a way I have not been in so long, I almost forgot what it was like. The days blur into a routine that feels almost normal if I do not think too hard about the circumstances, and I find myself relaxing incrementally, my guard lowering in degrees so small I do not notice, until I realize I am laughing at something he said, and the sound does not feel forced or strange. One evening he arrives later than usual and finds me on the sofa surrounded by printouts of baby furniture and necessities, prices circled in red pen, my calculator showing numbers that do not add up no matter how many times I try, and the tears come before I can stop them because I cannot afford any of this, and I have no idea how I am going to provide for this child, and the helplessness is a weight pressing down until I cannot breathe. Alexander crosses the room and takes the papers from my hands without a word, his eyes scanning the lists with an expression I cannot read. And then he pulls out his phone and makes a call, his voice quiet but commanding as he orders someone to arrange delivery of everything on my list and more. Top quality, no expense spared, tomorrow morning. I should protest, but the words stick in my throat, and when he ends the call and looks at me, I feel stripped bare, all my pride and independence revealed as the fragile constructs they have become. "You are trying to buy me," I say, and it comes out accusatory and desperate. "You think if you give me enough things I will stop questioning what you want from me." He sits beside me, close enough that I can feel the heat of him, and his gaze holds mine with an intensity that makes my pulse stutter. "I find your courage compelling," he says. "In my world, everyone either fears me or wants something from me. You do neither. You push back and challenge me and refuse to be cowed. And I have not met anyone like that in longer than I can remember." The confession hangs in the air between us, intimate and dangerous, and I feel something shift in my chest, a loosening of the knot of suspicion I have been clutching like armor, and I realize with a jolt of fear that feels different from all the other fears that I am beginning to trust him, beginning to believe that maybe his interest is not manipulation or possession, but something far more complicated and real. Rebecca arrives at the penthouse in the late afternoon, her eyes widening as she takes in the marble floors and sweeping city views, and I see myself through her perspective for a moment. How improbable and dangerous this entire situation must look from the outside. A pregnant waitress installed in luxury by a man whose name makes people lower their voices and look over their shoulders. She hugs me carefully as though I might shatter, and when we settle on the sofa with tea, I insisted on making myself. Despite the stocked kitchen and implicit permission to use everything, her worry manifests as bluntness that cuts straight through pleasantries. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" she says, and the question encompasses so much more than geography or circumstance, carrying the weight of judgment and genuine fear for my safety. I try to explain about the break-in and the threats and having nowhere else to go, but even to my own ears, it sounds like justification for something I know is reckless, like I am trying to convince myself as much as her. Rebecca leans forward, her hands gripping mine with urgent pressure, her voice dropping low as though the walls might be listening. "Alexander Tremaine is not just some wealthy benefactor," she says. "The things people say about him, the rumors about what happens to people who cross him or owe him money. Eleanor, you cannot possibly think this is safe." I want to argue, but the words tangle in my throat because how can I explain that I do feel safe here, safer than I have felt in months, even knowing what he is and what he is capable of doing. She tells me stories she has heard from other staff at the casino, whispers about violence and disappearances and territorial wars, about bodies found in the river and businesses that burn when they refuse his protection, and each word lands like a stone in my stomach, because I have been allowing myself to forget these truths in the face of his gentleness with me. "You are not special to him," Rebecca says, "and the cruelty is kindness, the hard truth delivered by someone who loves me enough to risk my anger. Men like that do not care about people like us. We are disposable, and whatever he wants from you, it is not what you think it is." After she leaves with promises to check on me and please to reconsider, I sit in the silence of the penthouse and pull out my phone, typing his name into search engines and watching the results populate with news articles and speculation and carefully worded reports that say everything by saying nothing directly. I read about his business holdings that span from legitimate real estate to casinos to imports that no one examines too closely, about the territory he controls through a network of loyalty and fear, about rivals who challenged him and simply disappeared from the landscape of power. There are photographs from charity events where he stands in tailored suits among politicians and socialites, his expression controlled and unreadable, the dangerous reality of him hidden behind respectability and wealth, And I realize how little I actually know about the man who has inserted himself into my life with such absolute authority. By the time Alexander arrives that evening, I have worked myself into a state of barely contained panic. All the trust I was building now undermined by knowledge I cannot unknow. And when he walks through the door with takeout containers, and that slight smile that softens the hard lines of his face, I feel like I am looking at a stranger wearing a familiar mask. "We need to talk," I say, and something in my tone makes him go still, his focus sharpening into that predatory attention that reminds me he is an apex creature in a world of violence I have only glimpsed the edges of. The call comes through security in the late morning, Thomas contacting Alexander to inform him that James Colborne is in the lobby demanding to see Eleanor, and I watch Alexander's expression shift into something cold and calculating as he listens, his eyes finding mine across the penthouse living room, where I have been pretending to read the same page of a book for 20 minutes. "He should not be able to get within 100 yards of this building," Alexander says into the phone, his voice carrying a warning that makes my stomach clench. But then his gaze sharpens on me, and something in my face must tell him I need to do this, because he says to send James up with an escort, and the decision feels both terrifying and necessary in ways I cannot fully articulate. Alexander ends the call and crosses to where I sit, his presence solid and reassuring, even as my hands begin to tremble with anticipation and anger I have been suppressing for months. "You do not have to see him," he says, and the gentleness in his voice is at odds with the lethal readiness in his posture. "I want to," I say, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "I need him to know that I see exactly what he is now." Alexander nods once and positions himself near the window with a clear line to the door, and I realize he is placing himself between me and any potential threat, his body language shifting into something predatory and controlled that reminds me what he is capable of when something he protects is endangered. When the elevator doors open and James steps out flanked by two of Alexander's security personnel, I barely recognize the man I once thought I loved, his face haggard and his clothes rumpled, desperation clinging to him like a second skin that makes him seem smaller and more pathetic than I remember. "Eleanor," he says, and my name in his mouth feels like a violation, his eyes darting between me and Alexander with calculation that turns my stomach. "I came to apologize, to make things right. We can be a family, you and me and the baby." The words are rehearsed and hollow, and I see through them with a clarity that feels like scales falling from my eyes, recognizing the manipulation tactics that once worked on me when I was young and naive and believed that love meant accepting whatever crumbs of affection someone offered. "You do not want me," I say, rising from the sofa with my hand instinctively moving to my belly, where the baby shifts and turns, a reminder of what is at stake. "You want him to forgive your debts." James's expression flickers with something ugly before he rearranges his features into false sincerity. "I got you the job at the casino," he says, and the admission lands like a physical blow, even though part of me already knew. "I thought if Tremaine noticed you, he might go easy on me. Maybe even clear what I owe if he took an interest. You were always so pretty, and I figured a man like him would appreciate that." The casual cruelty of it steals my breath. The revelation that my suffering and desperation were orchestrated, that he sent me pregnant and struggling into a dangerous man's territory as a bargaining chip for his own salvation, and I feel something break inside me that I did not know was still whole, the last fragile thread of connection to who I was before all of this. Alexander moves then, his voice cutting through the room with lethal precision. "Thomas, remove him, and I will deal with his accounts personally," and the promise in those words makes James go pale, because even he understands that Alexander's personal attention is not something anyone wants. As security escorts James back to the elevator, his protests and pleas fading behind closing doors, I feel my legs give out, and Alexander catches me before I hit the floor, his arms solid and safe as he guides me back to the sofa and sits beside me, close enough that I can feel his warmth seeping into the cold that has settled in my bones. I let myself break then, the sobs tearing through me with violence I cannot control, grieving not for James, but for my own blindness, for the months I wasted believing his lies and his false promises, for the version of myself who thought she deserved so little that even his neglect seemed better than nothing. Alexander holds me through it, one hand stroking my hair while the other rests protectively over my belly. And I realize this is the first time I have allowed him this close, the first time I have let anyone see me completely shattered. And he does not flinch from my pain or try to fix it with empty words. He simply stays solid and present until the storm passes and I can breathe again. He will never come near you again, Alexander says against my hair, and the promise is absolute, a vow delivered with the weight of his entire empire behind it. I believe him, and in believing him I also accept that whatever exists between us has crossed some invisible threshold, that I have given him a part of myself I can never take back, and that terrifies me almost as much as it feels inevitable and right. The appointment is scheduled for 2 in the afternoon at a medical office in a building Alexander owns, and when he arrives at the penthouse to accompany me, I am already anxious about the strange intimacy of this situation, having a man who is not the father attending something so profoundly personal. Yet when he asks if I would prefer he wait outside, I realize immediately that I want him there, need him there in ways I cannot fully articulate even to myself. The drive is quiet, but not uncomfortable, his hand resting near mine on the seat between us, close enough that I could reach for it if I had the courage, and I catch myself stealing glances at his profile as he watches the city pass beyond tinted windows, wondering what he is thinking and whether he feels the strange weight of expectation settling over this ordinary medical appointment. The staff greets us with professional warmth that carries an assumption I notice immediately, the nurse calling us by his last name as though we are a unit, asking how we are doing with a smile that includes both of us in the question, and neither Alexander nor I correct the misunderstanding, because what would I even say, that he is not the father, but has somehow become more present and protective than any biological parent could be, that I am living in his home and under his protection, in an arrangement that defies easy categorization or explanation. In the examination room, I change into the thin gown and try not to think about Alexander sitting just beyond the curtain, try not to imagine what he sees when he looks at me now with my body changing and swelling with another man's child. But when the doctor begins the ultrasound and asks if father wants to come closer, Alexander moves to my side without hesitation, and his hand finds mine with a gentleness that makes my throat tight with emotions I am afraid to name. The screen flickers with gray and white shapes that gradually resolve into something recognizable, a profile in tiny hands, and the flickering movement of a heartbeat that fills the room with rhythmic sound, and I feel Alexander's grip tighten on my hand as we both stare at this impossible miracle, this life that has brought us together in the strangest and most unexpected way. The baby is healthy and developing perfectly, the doctor says, and I see something shift in Alexander's expression as he watches the screen. A vulnerability and wonder that transforms the hard, dangerous lines of his face into something almost boyish. And when the appointment ends and we are alone in his car again, he admits quietly that he never considered having children, never imagined himself in this role, but seeing the scan has affected him in ways he did not anticipate or know how to process. That night he stays later than usual, the city lights spreading below the penthouse windows as we sit together and talk in ways we have not before. The careful walls we have maintained beginning to crumble under the weight of truth and trust slowly building between us. He tells me fragments of his history, growing up in violence and learning early that power and fear were the only currencies that mattered, rising through ranks of an organization that demanded ruthlessness and rewarded strength while punishing any hint of weakness or sentiment. And I hear the loneliness beneath his words, the isolation of a position that allows no equals and no true intimacy. I share my own past, smaller and more ordinary but marked by its own losses, parents who died too young, and a series of poor choices made from desperation and the bone-deep fear of being alone. And he listens without judgment or pity, simply present and attentive in ways I have never experienced before. When he finally leaves near midnight, his hand lingers on my cheek for a moment that stretches between us, charged with possibility and promise. And I stand at the window, watching his car disappear into the city, knowing that something fundamental has shifted tonight, that we have crossed an invisible threshold from strangers bound by circumstance into something far more dangerous and infinitely more real. The woman appears without warning in the late afternoon while I am resting on the sofa with a book I have been pretending to read, the security system chiming to announce a visitor, and Alexander's voice carrying from the foyer in tones that sound more formal and guarded than I have heard in days. And when I rise to see who has arrived, I find myself facing a woman so striking and polished that I feel immediately disheveled and inadequate in my casual maternity clothes and bare feet. Catherine Drummond is tall and slender with dark hair styled in a sleek cut that probably costs more than I used to make in a month, her suit tailored to perfection and her heels expensive enough that I recognize the red soles even from across the room. And the way she looks at Alexander carries a possessive familiarity that makes something twist uncomfortably in my chest, even though I have no right to feel anything about who he knows or what his past relationships might have been. Alexander, she says, her voice smooth and cultured with an edge that sounds like silk wrapped around steel. We need to discuss the Vancouver situation, and I thought it better to handle this in person rather than through intermediaries. Her eyes slide to me with an assessment that feels clinical and dismissive simultaneously, taking in my pregnancy and my obvious lack of sophistication with a single sweeping glance that makes me want to disappear, even as something stubborn in me refuses to retreat from my own space. "This is Eleanor," Alexander says, and something in his tone shifts into protective territory that I have heard before when he deals with threats or challenges to things he considers his. "Eleanor, this is Catherine Drummond, a business associate." The introduction is minimal and deliberately uninformative, but Catherine's smile sharpens with understanding that clearly goes deeper than his words suggest. And I realize with uncomfortable certainty that this woman knows Alexander in ways I do not, that there is history here he has not shared, and that my presence is an intrusion into something that existed long before I fainted on his casino floor. They retreat to the study, and I return to the sofa, but cannot focus on anything except the low murmur of voices behind the closed door and the way Catherine touched Alexander's arm as they walked past me. Casual and familiar in ways that spark jealousy I have absolutely no right to feel, because what am I to him really, except a responsibility he has chosen to accept? A pregnant woman he is protecting out of some code I do not fully understand. Or perhaps simple attraction that will fade once the novelty wears off. And he remembers that his world contains women like Catherine, who match his sophistication and power, rather than women like me, who bring nothing but complications and dependence. When Catherine finally leaves an hour later, she pauses by the door and her eyes find mine with calculation that sends ice down my spine. A look that says she sees exactly what is developing here, and considers it either amusing or threatening. I cannot determine which. "Take care of yourself, Eleanor," she says with false warmth that does not reach her eyes. Pregnancy can be such a vulnerable time. Alexander closes the door behind her with more force than necessary, and I watch him stand there for a moment with tension radiating from his shoulders before he turns and finds me watching him. "She means nothing," he says before I can ask. "An old involvement that ended years ago, strictly business now." I nod because what else can I do? But the jealousy churning through me is undeniable and terrifying, because it means my feelings have developed far beyond simple gratitude or even the attraction I have been trying to deny, and the realization that I am falling in love with Alexander Tremaine crashes over me with the force of a wave that could drown me if I let it. "I cannot do this," I say, the words escaping before I can stop them, and I see his expression shift into something sharp and focused as he crosses to where I sit. "Cannot do what?" he demands, his voice dropping into that dangerous register that used to frighten me, but now just makes me ache because I know the control it represents and the violence he is capable of, and I am falling for him anyway, despite every rational thought screaming that this is madness. This, I gesture between us. Whatever this is becoming, I am nobody, Alexander, just a waitress with an ex who used me and a baby I can barely figure out how to provide for. And you are, I falter, because how do I even categorize what he is? And women like Catherine are your world, not women like me. He pulls me to my feet with hands that are gentle despite the intensity burning in his eyes, and I can feel my heart racing as he studies my face like he is trying to read something written there in a language only he understands. You think I want Catherine, he says, and it is not a question, but a statement laced with disbelief. You think any of that matters compared to what I feel when I watch you sleep, or when the baby moves and you put my hand there to feel it, or when you smile at me like I am not the monster everyone else sees, but just a man you might actually trust. Eleanor, you have completely undone me, and you do not even realize it. Thomas finds Alexander in his office the morning after Catherine's visit, closing the door with a deliberation that signals the conversation will not be pleasant, and Alexander looks up from the reports he has been reviewing with eyes that already carry the exhaustion of too many complications converging at once. We have a problem, Thomas says without preamble, his tone flat in the way it gets when delivering information he knows will provoke dangerous reactions. Catherine has been talking to the Kovacs organization and the Seattle contingent, spreading word about your situation with Eleanor, and there are people who see this as weakness. They can exploit or leverage they can use against you. Alexander feels rage ignite cold and precise in his chest, because he knew Catherine would not simply accept his dismissal, that her pride and her ambitions would demand retaliation. But using Eleanor as a weapon crosses lines that will require brutal responses. What exactly has she told them? Alexander asks, his voice dropping into the lethal calm that makes even Thomas tread carefully. That you are compromised, Thomas says. That you have become emotionally invested in a pregnant nobody with no family and no protection. That anyone who takes her can negotiate terms you would never normally accept, because you have made her a visible vulnerability instead of keeping her hidden and secure. The assessment is accurate enough to sting, because Alexander knows he has been careless, allowing his feelings to override strategic thinking, bringing Eleanor into his world in ways that expose her to exactly this kind of targeting. And the guilt mixes with fury until he can barely think through the murderous impulses demanding immediate violent action. Increase security on the penthouse immediately, Alexander orders. Full rotation of our best people. No one gets close without going through multiple checkpoints, and I want surveillance on Catherine and everyone she has contacted in the last 72 hours. Thomas nods but hesitates before adding, you should consider moving Eleanor somewhere completely off-grid until we neutralize the threat. A location no one knows about, where she would be safer than any protected penthouse in the city. Alexander knows Thomas is right from a tactical standpoint, but the thought of sending Eleanor away, of not being able to see her or ensure personally that she is safe, feels impossible in ways that confirm everything Catherine is using against him. No, he says, she stays where I can reach her, but I am not leaving her alone anymore until this is handled. That night, he returns to the penthouse with a bag containing enough clothing and necessities for an extended stay, and Eleanor looks up from the book she has been reading with surprise that shifts into concern when she sees his expression. What happened? She asks, rising from the sofa with effort, as her pregnancy makes every movement more deliberate and careful. Alexander explains the situation with brutal honesty, because she deserves to know the danger she is in and the complications his protection has created, watching her process the information with a composure that simultaneously impresses and worries him. So Catherine wants to hurt you by using me, Eleanor says slowly, and staying close to me makes you vulnerable to attack or manipulation, which means the logical thing would be to distance yourself or send me somewhere isolated until the threat passes. Yes, Alexander confirms, but I am not doing that. I am staying here with you where I can ensure nothing happens. Strategy be damned. He sees something shift in her expression, a softening and acceptance that feels like trust he has not fully earned but desperately wants to deserve. The nights that follow create an intimacy more profound than any physical contact could achieve, the two of them existing in the same space through dark hours when sleep eludes them both, and conversation flows more freely without the barriers daylight seems to impose. Alexander finds himself on the balcony at 3 in the morning, 4 days into this new arrangement. The city spread below like a kingdom he controls, but which suddenly feels less important than the woman sleeping inside, except when he turns, he finds Eleanor standing in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, and watching him with eyes that see too much. Could not sleep, she asks, and he shakes his head, because sleep has become nearly impossible with the awareness of threats circling, and the weight of feelings he has never experienced before, making his chest tight with unnamed emotions. They stand together in the cold air talking about fear and trust, and the impossible situation they have created, Alexander admitting that she has become essential to him in ways he cannot fully articulate, that the thought of anything happening to her or the baby creates panic he has not felt since he was a child facing his father's violence. Eleanor confesses she feels the same despite knowing she should protect herself better, that falling for him is probably the most dangerous thing she has ever done, but she cannot seem to stop or want to stop anymore. When he kisses her, it feels inevitable and terrifying, tentative and searching, as though they are both afraid of breaking something fragile. An acknowledgement of everything unspoken and denied, finally given form and breath between them. Morning light filters through the penthouse windows with a harsh brightness that feels accusatory, and I wake alone in my bed with the memory of Alexander's kiss still burning on my lips and a knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach. Because what have I done? What line have we crossed that cannot be uncrossed? And the fear that his interest is temporary or possessive rather than genuine makes it difficult to breathe as I force myself out of bed and into the day. Alexander is already awake when I find him in the kitchen, showered and dressed in dark slacks and a shirt that still carries the crisp formality of his business world. And when his eyes meet mine, there is something guarded there that was not present last night when he held me on the balcony and kissed me like I was precious and essential. "Good morning," he says, his voice carefully neutral in a way that makes my heart sink, because this is what I feared, the morning after bringing regret and distance, where last night held promise and connection. "Coffee?" he asks. And I shake my head, because caffeine is limited during pregnancy, and also because I cannot pretend this awkwardness is normal or acceptable when everything inside me is screaming. "About last night," I start, but he cuts me off with a shake of his head. "I should not have pushed," Alexander says. "You need space and time, and I am too used to taking what I want without considering consequences." The words feel like rejection, even though his expression suggests he thinks he is being considerate, giving me room I never asked for, and do not actually want now that the possibility of having him has become real. I spend the day avoiding him, even though we share the same space, retreating to my room with books I cannot focus on while he works in the study with the door closed. The distance between us somehow worse than the tension that preceded our kiss, because at least tension held possibility where this polite separation holds only loss. Thomas arrives in the late afternoon, and I hear low, urgent conversation that carries a tone of crisis, and when Alexander emerges, his face is set in lines of controlled fury that I have learned means violence is imminent somewhere in his world. "I have to handle a situation," he tells me, standing in my doorway with hands shoved in his pockets like he does not trust himself to reach for me. "It will take a day or two, and I am leaving additional security, but you will be safe here." The thought of him leaving creates panic disproportionate to the time frame, and I realize with uncomfortable clarity how much I have come to depend on his presence, not just for safety, but for the feeling of being seen and valued in ways I never experienced before. "Be careful," I say, inadequate words for the fear churning through me. Alexander holds my gaze for a long moment, like he wants to say something more, but instead just nods and leaves. And the penthouse feels hollow without him in ways that terrify me. Because how did I become so tangled up in a dangerous man in such a short time? He is gone for 2 days, and they stretch endlessly, every hour dragging while I wait for updates that do not come and imagine worst-case scenarios that make my hands shake and my pulse race. When he finally returns at 3 in the morning on the third day, I am still awake, curled on the sofa pretending to watch television. And when I see him standing in the doorway exhausted and with blood on his collar and knuckles, I am across the room before conscious thought intervenes. "What happened?" I demand, reaching for his hands to examine the damage, and he lets me pull him toward the bathroom, where the light is better, and I can properly assess the injuries. "It is handled," Alexander says, his voice rough with exhaustion. But I do not care about whatever business crisis required his absence, only that he is hurt and here, and letting me tend to him with a vulnerability I have never witnessed before. I clean his knuckles with gentle efficiency, the intimacy of caring for him breaking through all the awkwardness and hesitation that has poisoned the last few days. And when I look up, our faces are inches apart, and his eyes hold an intensity that steals my breath. "I have never let anyone do this," he says quietly. "Never let anyone see me like this, damaged and tired and less than controlled. I have never felt as safe as I do with you, I confess, or as terrified because you could destroy me so easily. Alexander and I think I would let you." The prenatal appointment is routine, and I have attended enough of them now that the familiar rhythm of check-in and waiting feels almost comfortable. The clinic bustling with other expectant mothers, and the antiseptic smell mixing with the faint scent of coffee from the lobby cafe, and Alexander had a meeting he could not postpone this morning. So I assured him I would be fine with just Marcus and Derek, the 2 security personnel he assigned to accompany me everywhere now after the threats escalated. I am in the examination room changing back into my clothes after the ultrasound when I hear a commotion in the hallway, raised voices, and a sound like something heavy hitting the floor, and my hands freeze on the buttons of my shirt because that is not normal clinic noise, and every instinct screams danger, even before my exam room door crashes open. James stands there looking wild and desperate, his face thinner than I remember, and his eyes carrying the manic gleam of someone who has nothing left to lose, and behind him I catch a glimpse of Marcus on the floor not moving, while a man I do not recognize holds a gun with casual competence that speaks of professional violence. "You are coming with me," James says, and his hand closes around my wrist with bruising force that makes me gasp because I am 6 months pregnant and clumsy with the weight of the baby and terror flooding my system. I try to pull away, but he drags me into the hallway where 2 more men wait, the clinic staff and patients pressed against walls with faces white with fear. And Derek is also down bleeding from a head wound that makes my stomach lurch. "Please," I say, trying to reach whatever humanity might still exist in the man I once thought I loved. "You do not want to do this, James. Just let me go and we can figure something else out." He laughs and the sound is broken and bitter. "Figure something out," he repeats. "I figured it out, Eleanor. Catherine figured it out. We take you, and Tremaine gives us what we want, or he loses what matters most to him." They move me quickly through a service exit where a van waits with engine running, shoving me inside with efficiency that speaks of planning and inside information because they knew exactly when I would be here and how to bypass Alexander's security. The warehouse they bring me to is cold and empty, vast space filled with shadows and the smell of oil and decay, and James forces me into a metal chair, while one of the men zip ties my wrists together in front of me, because at least they are aware enough of my pregnancy not to bind my hands behind my back. Catherine appears from an office area looking elegant and composed, her beauty sharp and cold as she studies me with an expression mixing contempt and calculation. "You have caused considerable complications," she says conversationally. "Alexander was supposed to be a useful connection and profit source, but instead he has become inconveniently obsessed with you and your situation." I focus on breathing slowly and staying calm because panic will not help me or the baby, and I need to be smart and alert if I'm going to survive whatever comes next. Alexander will come for me, I say with more confidence than I feel, and when he does, none of you will survive what he brings. Catherine smiles, but her eyes stay cold. Oh, we are counting on him coming, dear. That is entirely the point. The warehouse doors explode inward with a violence that shakes the concrete floor beneath my chair, and suddenly the vast empty space is filled with armed men moving with military precision. Alexander at the center of them, like the eye of a hurricane, his face a mask of controlled fury, more terrifying than any rage, because this is a man who has decided that blood will be spilled and nothing will stop him until he has taken back what belongs to him. Catherine's composure shatters, and she stumbles backward while her hired men raise weapons, but they are already outmatched and outmaneuvered by an organization that has been perfecting violence for decades. And I watch Thomas move like death itself as he cuts through the warehouse toward Catherine, while Alexander comes straight for me with eyes locked on mine, like I am the only thing in this entire building that matters. James panics when he sees Alexander approaching and drags me up from the chair using my bound body as a shield, his arm around my throat and a gun appearing in his shaking hand. And I feel the baby kick hard against my ribs, as if sensing the dangers surrounding us both. Let her go, Alexander says, and his voice is quiet and cold and absolutely certain. You are already dead, James. The only question is whether you die quickly or slowly, and in more pain than you can possibly imagine. James's arm tightens and the gun presses against my temple, and I can smell his fear sweat and feel his heart racing against my back as he realizes there is no scenario where he survives this. She is mine, James shouts, and his voice cracks with desperation. You let me walk out of here, or I swear I will kill her and the baby. I have nothing left to lose, Tremaine. Alexander moves closer, and now I can see his eyes properly, the relief and fury warring in those dark depths as he takes in every detail of my condition, the zip ties around my wrists, and the way I am breathing carefully to stay calm, and the slight swell of my belly pressed against James's restraining arm. She was never yours, Alexander says, and there is something almost pitying in his tone beneath the rage. You threw her away like she was nothing, and now you think you can use her as a bargaining chip against me, but you fundamentally misunderstood the situation because I will burn this entire city down before I let you take her from me. Everything happens in the space between heartbeats, Alexander's hand moving to his gun, and James's finger tightening on the trigger, and my own body twisting away from the weapon, with protective instinct stronger than fear, and then the shot rings out deafening in the enclosed space. But it is James who falls, taking me down with him as his weight collapses. Alexander is there before I hit the ground, catching me and carefully removing James's dead arm from around my shoulders, his hands shaking as they move over me, checking for injuries with a thoroughness that would be clinical except for the way his breathing has gone ragged. Are you hurt? He demands. Eleanor, look at me. Are you hurt? Did he hurt the baby? And I shake my head because I am fine, terrified and shaking, but physically unharmed. Alexander cuts the zip ties with a knife produced from somewhere, and then pulls me against his chest, one hand cradling the back of my head, and the other pressed protectively over where our baby rests, and I feel him trembling with reaction and residual fury. The hospital confirms what I already know in my bones, that the baby is fine, and I am physically unharmed despite the terror of the last hours. But Alexander will not leave my side, even as the doctors assure him I need rest, his hand wrapped around mine with a grip that speaks of a man who came too close to losing everything and will not risk letting go. Thomas appears in the doorway, and the look that passes between him and Alexander carries entire conversations about violence and retribution, and I understand with sudden cold clarity that what happened in the warehouse was only the beginning of Alexander's response to those who dared take me. Catherine, Thomas says quietly, and Alexander's jaw tightens before he looks down at me with eyes asking a question he does not voice. I know what he is asking. whether I can accept what comes next, whether I can live with the man he truly is when he stops filtering his nature through the gentleness he shows me. Go, I tell him, and I squeeze his hand so he knows I mean it. Do what you need to do. I am safe here, and I understand. He studies my face for a long moment, as if memorizing every detail, before he leans down and kisses my forehead with a tenderness that contrasts sharply with the cold fury in his eyes when he straightens and follows Thomas out. The next 48 hours pass in a strange suspension where I recover in the penthouse under guard, while Alexander dismantles everyone connected to my kidnapping with ruthless efficiency that I hear about in fragments from the security personnel who rotate through and from news reports of gang violence and warehouse fires and bodies found in the river. Rebecca visits, and she is pale and shaken because the whole city knows Alexander Tremaine went to war over a woman, and she holds my hand and asks if I am truly okay with what he is, with what loving him means. I tell her the truth, that I see all of Alexander, the violence and the protection and the unexpected vulnerability, and I choose him anyway, because he chose me when I had nothing and no one, and what we have built between us is worth the darkness that comes with his world. When Alexander finally returns, he looks exhausted, and there is blood on his shirt cuff that he has not bothered to hide, and he stops in the doorway, as if uncertain of his welcome, now that I have seen the full scope of what he is capable of doing. I cross to him without hesitation and take his face in my hands, studying the shadows in his eyes and the tension in his jaw, and I kiss him with all the acceptance and love I feel because he needs to know that I am not afraid of him, even when I should be. He breaks, his control fracturing as he pulls me close with a carefulness that belies his strength. And against my hair, he says that Catherine is dead, and everyone who helped her is dead, and no one will ever threaten me or our baby again. I know, I whisper back, and I am not horrified or disgusted, but rather relieved, because in his world, there is no halfway, no partial protection, only absolute security bought with absolute violence. We stand there in the fading afternoon light, and I feel the shift between us, the final wall crumbling as we accept each other completely, without reservation or pretense. Stay with me, Alexander says, and his voice is raw with emotion. Not as someone I am protecting, but as my partner, as the woman I love. Stay with me, Eleanor, and let me build a life with you. The words hang between us heavy with promise and permanence, and I realize he is offering me everything, his heart and his world and his future, trusting me with the vulnerability he shows no one else. Yes, I tell him with certainty, blooming in my chest like warmth after cold. Yes, I will stay with you. And the relief in his eyes transforms his entire face as he kisses me with a reverence that makes my heart ache, because this man who commands empires and fear is looking at me like I am the only thing in his world that matters. The decision to move into Alexander's main residence happens quickly after that. A matter of days where my few belongings are transported from the penthouse to the sprawling estate on the north side of the city that serves as both his home and the operational heart of his organization. And when I walk through those doors for the first time as his partner, rather than someone under temporary protection, I feel the weight of eyes assessing me and judging whether I am worthy of the position I now occupy beside him. Alexander introduces me to the key members of his inner circle with a hand at the small of my back that speaks of possession and pride, and I meet men with hard faces and dangerous reputations who soften slightly when they see my condition and Alexander's protective stance, because even in a world built on violence, there is apparently still respect for family and the women who carry the next generation. Thomas is the easiest, already familiar and surprisingly warm in his approval, as he tells me quietly that he has never seen Alexander like this, that I have changed something fundamental in a man who was becoming more isolated and cold with each passing year. I earn respect not through any effort to impress, but simply by being steady and composed when I am introduced to the harsher realities of Alexander's world, by not flinching when business is discussed in clinical terms that reference violence and territory, and by the obvious fact that Alexander himself is different now, his decisions filtered through new priorities that center on building rather than simply maintaining power. The baby's arrival looms closer as I enter my 7th month, and Alexander becomes intensely focused on preparations, transforming an entire wing of the house into a secure nursery suite with monitoring systems and reinforced walls that seem excessive until I remember that this child will be born into a world where threats are real and constant. He consults me on every decision from paint colors to furniture, but I see the deeper current beneath the planning. His need to create absolute safety for this small life we are bringing into his complicated, dangerous world. And I love him more for the tenderness that drives his obsessive attention to detail. We talk late into the night about marriage, and he produces a ring that takes my breath away, platinum and diamonds that catch light like captured stars, and he asks me properly with words that shake slightly as he admits he never thought he would want this. A wife and family, and all the vulnerability that comes with loving someone more than he loves power. I say yes because there is no other answer, because he has become essential to me in ways I could not have imagined that first night when I fainted on his casino floor, and when he slides the ring onto my finger, it feels like a promise, and a protection, and a claim all at once. Labor begins on a cold morning in early March, when I am only 37 weeks, and Alexander is in a meeting with his attorneys about the business restructuring. And the first contraction catches me by surprise, as I am standing in the nursery arranging the soft blankets that arrived yesterday, a sharp tightening across my belly that makes me grip the edge of the crib until it passes. I time the next 3 contractions before I call Alexander, my voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in my chest, and I hear him bark orders to someone before his attention focuses entirely on me as he asks how far apart and how intense and promises he will be home in 10 minutes. He arrives in 8, his driver having broken every traffic law to get him here, and when he walks through the door and sees me breathing through another contraction, his face transforms from concern to fierce determination as he takes my bag in one hand and supports me with the other, guiding me to the car with a gentleness that belies the tension in his body. The drive to the hospital passes in a blur of contractions, and Alexander's steady presence beside me, his hand wrapped around mine, and his voice low and calm, as he tells me I am doing perfectly, that everything will be fine. And I see the fear beneath his composure, because for all his power and control, this is something he cannot command or manage, a process that will unfold in its own time, regardless of his will. At the hospital, we are ushered into a private suite that Alexander arranged weeks ago, and the medical team treats him with deference that speaks of generous donations and his reputation. But all his focus is on me as the labor intensifies, and the hours stretch long and painful in ways no amount of preparation fully captured. He never leaves, not even when the nurses suggest he might want to step out. And instead he stays beside me through every contraction and every moment of doubt when I think I cannot do this, his voice in my ear reminding me that I am strong, that I can do anything, that he is here and I am not alone. When our daughter finally arrives after 14 hours of labor, I hear her cry before I see her, and the sound breaks something open in my chest, a rush of love so overwhelming that tears stream down my face as the doctor places her on my chest, this tiny perfect creature with dark hair and furious lungs, who is somehow mine. Alexander is crying too, tears running unchecked down his face as he looks at our daughter with an expression of such raw wonder and love that I fall in love with him all over again. And when he reaches out with shaking hands to touch her tiny fingers, she wraps her hand around his thumb, and I watch this powerful, dangerous man completely undone by the grip of a newborn. He leans down to kiss my forehead, and then our daughter's, and his voice breaks as he promises to protect us both with everything he is, with his last breath if necessary, And I know he means it with an absoluteness that most people will never understand. Grace. Catherine Tremaine, he whispers as he traces her perfect features with infinite gentleness. You are named for the grace your mother brought into my life when I needed it most. I look up at him through my exhaustion and joy, and I understand that fainting on his casino floor months ago was not the catastrophe it seemed in that moment, but rather the beginning of everything I needed, the start of a journey that brought me love and safety.